Second post of the day, we're going to discuss pleasures and obviously any serious philosophy of human good or ethics or how to live must take pleasures into account, must discuss them, must analyze what causes them, must distinguish some from some group of pleasures from others. Must very carefully consider what goes on with pleasure, because it is a huge motivational force for human behavior. Now, in a simple sense, all pleasures are equal. They're all equal and they're all the same in a very simple sense. They are all the result of the activation of a favorable brain circuit, a neurology, whatever neuron path within your brain that gets activated from a certain outside stimulus or chemicals, and the accompanying sensation or feeling that gets triggered in your mind and human consciousness is what we broadly experience or know to be pleasure. Now, one set of brain circuits obviously will get activated when you're in a forest and you see a bear and you think it's going to attack you. That's not the pleasure circuit. That's the fear, flight or flight, dread, all those things. But quite another set brain circuits gets activated when you hear a pleasant melody, a Mozart symphony or whatever. And so we're going to talk about pleasure in that sense today. Now, all pleasures are, again, simply pleasant brain activity states and the effect that those brain circuits have on the activation of those brain circuits on human consciousness. But here the similarities between all pleasures end very quickly. Now, pleasures can vary in intensity. Pleasures from the barely pleasurable, just barely above a non-pleasurable feeling, to the most pleasurable, intense feeling imaginable. Pleasures vary with respect to how long they can be expected to last, what is their cause, and whether they can become addictive. Now, some pleasures are totally awful and despicable. Pleasure, for example, in killing or torturing someone would be one of those. But other than these distinctions as to intensity, cause, addictiveness, all that, even moral quality of the pleasure, I don't want to talk about those distinctions. I want to talk about what I regard to be the most important distinction with respect to pleasures and the worth of the various pleasures, and the value of the different pleasures. And it's one that's very rarely discussed. And that is, the distinction is whether you legitimately earned or had a right to the pleasure. Now, that might seem weird, and I'm going to discuss it in detail, so it'll hopefully make more sense toward the end. But the distinction is, with one group of pleasures, I'm going to argue, you have an absolute right, you totally earned, you totally have a right to that pleasure. And those are valuable, tend to be very valuable pleasures. With another types of pleasures, you didn't really earn it at all. Maybe you didn't, and you don't really have a right to it. So those are the unearned pleasures. So let's start with the first one. Some pleasures are fully earned, or you have a complete right to. What do I mean by that? The pleasure produced in these pleasures are the result of the activation of many different aspects and efforts of the self over a continuous, often several-year period of time. There were many steps involved in getting to this pleasurable state, and you were vital to almost all of these steps getting accomplished. You took no shortcuts, no one else did the work for you. Often you overcame adversity along the way, adversity so deep that it seemed that you would never get to your goal. And the pleasure, this earned pleasure at the end that you ultimately experience, often alternates with a feeling of immense pride. So whether or not these pleasures, these earned pleasures, are particularly intense or not, you deserve and you earned every iota or ounce of this pleasure. Every one. And so an easy example is, imagine a couch potato that trains for a year and becomes a superb, runs a superb first marathon at a very competitive pace. He trained for a year, overcame a lot of nagging injuries, took no drugs to get there. He hits the finish line of the marathon, earning every ounce of pleasure he feels. It's an easy example. Another example, let's say you live in the mountains, and you know the cold winter is coming, so you chop wood and build a cabin for yourself with a fireplace. and you do all the work yourself or with minimal help. And when winter comes, you go inside and stay warm and are protected. And so you feel the pleasure and the pride of home ownership at that point. That was earned as well. Now, then in contrast to these pleasures, we have the unearned pleasures. You don't really deserve them. You didn't really. You don't really have a right to them. You still get the pleasurable brainwaves. You still get the activation of the the favorable brain circuit that produces this pleasurable sensation in consciousness. But you don't really deserve those waves. You don't really deserve that feeling. When you think about the issue long and hard, I think you'll see you didn't really deserve it. Two great examples: drug use and porn. Both drug use and porn cause pleasurable brain activity. Activates those circuits in the brain that make you temporarily feel good, elated, content, pleased, just pleasant in general, what have you. But after you think about it some more, what did you do to earn or have a right to this pleasant brain activity? Nothing really. Let's see. On the internet, in the porn example, you hopped on the internet and in 3 seconds you pulled up a porn video that someone else made, and that's it. Drug use, you're at a club or somewhere else and someone offers you cocaine, you purchased it, or maybe it's even given to you for free. Then you take it and the chemicals do the work and you feel good. You go to a bar, or another example, you go to a bar and drink 5 beers. Lift up the cans to your mouth, that's it. Maybe go to the bathroom periodically, and voila, you feel the pleasure again. Again, what did you do? Nothing. You just popped the drug in your mouth, you just hopped on the net and watched the porn. Importantly, neither drug use nor porn, or someone that gets pleasure in this kind of sense, doesn't really involve any sense of pride or accomplishment along with the pleasure, as it did in our previous examples. There's very rarely feeling of pride or self-satisfaction. And I think that is a huge giveaway that this was an unearned pleasure. Now, examples we've offered have been on the extreme boundaries of earned and unearned pleasures. So there's a continuum, I would argue. Most things are not this easy. Those are easy examples, but there's a continuum between, on the one end is fully earned pleasures you have a complete right to, often involve not just a sense of pleasure, but pride that is kind of alternating with the pleasure. And on the other hand, completely unearned pleasures that you really have no right to. There's often no feeling of pride on these pleasures. And then there's mixes in between where you might have some that are you have a partial right to. You did something, but your contribution was much smaller, and therefore you may not have a huge right to the pleasure. You might have some right to it, but not a lot. This one I would think maybe just if you go to a concert and you listen to some music. Other people are performing the songs, they created the songs, but you made some effort to go there and put yourself in a certain frame of mind to listen. You paid attention for several hours and something like that. You might have a little bit higher right to the pleasure. Now, anytime a pleasure is obtained easily in a matter of very few steps that take more than a few minutes, you're likely dealing with unearned pleasures. That's a rule or a guideline. If money procures the pleasure, then again, more likely to be unearned. Not always, but more likely to be unearned. Anytime pleasure involves lots of steps, all of which you orchestrated, then again, you're likely to be an earned pleasure. Not always, but you're likely to be an earned pleasure. Final point, the type of pleasure you're talking about, which pleasure, the unearned and the unearned, which pleasure, if we think about it, is more likely to become a part of self-identity, self-worth, and self-esteem? Obviously, the earned pleasures. Most people that run one marathon well or build one house well include that in their self-concept. That pleasant feeling or that pride, pleasant, prideful feeling is included in their self-concept forever. They don't have to keep running marathons or building homes to maintain that pleasant feeling. Most people don't. The pleasure stays or abides within their personality. But with unearned pleasures, there's no pride. It doesn't get the pleasure doesn't positively get ingrained into self-worth or self-esteem. So I think with that explains, I think, with the unearned pleasures why there's a certain compulsion to keep doing the activity. and getting the pleasure, because it's not ever being really absorbed into self-identity as something you earn and can form a stable concept of self. So that's it for today. I might come back to this distinction because I think it's a good distinction and useful to look at pleasures. And I'm going to also now go to my third post of the day.